video is a follow-up tutorial to my original inventory tutorial. The whole video is purely based on bug reports from you guys and based on features that you guys have requested for my inventory. So I'm just going to show you what I've chosen to include here. I've chosen to include the opening and closing of the inventory, so when you press a button it fades into the screen here, and when you press the button again it closes. I've also chosen to be able to split the stacks in the inventory, so when we pick something up we can hold shift down and click it, and then this little box pops up so that we can actually split our stacks. And this is this is inspired by World of Warcraft, for example. So then you can basically pick how many items you want to split, and now you can see that our items split into 2 stacks instead. And you can also take some off, and you can delete them by clicking outside the inventory, of course. Other than that, I've also suggested that or decided to include the saving and loading functionality. So if I would take my inventory and split my items around here, I would be able to press the save button, and then if I close my game, for example, and open that up again, then if I press the load button, then all the items goes back into the inventory because it's loading everything I had before. Other than that, I'm also including movability for the inventory. So if you put your mouse inside the inventory and press the middle mouse button, then you can move the inventory around on the screen to place it somewhere else. And it also saves the position of the inventory. So this means that if you would save it here and close it, reopen it, and then open the inventory up and load it, then it will be placed at the correct position. It also loads the correct size and everything. For example, now I just saved my inventory with 30 slots, I think. If I changed it to 20 or something and open it up again, see my inventory has this size, and when I press the load button it gets the correct size and places the items inside it correctly. So this is the main points that I want to add to this inventory through this tutorial, and there will also be some bug fixing in the beginning, but I'll do the bug fixing first, and then I'll start adding these features to the inventory. So before I start the actual tutorial, I would like to say thanks to everyone who wrote me some ideas to some new features for the inventory, and everyone who actually reported some bugs to me so that I can fix my tutorial. Because the more you write me and the more features you request and the more bugs you find, the better my material gets. And it really means a lot to me that you're actually taking your time to write these things down and respond to me. So if any of you have any kinds of requests, for example a new topic you want a tutorial on, or some things I should improve in any of my videos, or some things I should add, then please feel free to comment on the video or private message me or write me an email or something, because it's really awesome that you're actually responding to my videos. I have replaced the original inventory project with this new project with all the updated features. So if you already bought the project files, well, then you can just use your download link to re-download it, and you will get all these new features. If you don't have your download link anymore, you can either email me or private message me here on YouTube, and then I'll give you a new download link so you can re-download your things. Okay, so let's get started on fixing all these things and adding some stuff to it. The first thing I want to do is to fix the scale. Right now we have this handle canvas script that actually switches the what is it called, the canvas scale from constant pixel size into scale with screen size. And basically I want to be able to have scale with screen size on at all times and still be able to have my canvas scaling correctly. If I play my game here, you'll see that it looks kind of weird when I have scale with screen size on from the beginning. And basically what I want to do is to delete this handled canvas script. First I want to remove it from the canvas, right click and remove, and then I want to go to my script folder and then delete the handled canvas, because we actually don't need it. We only need to do one little thing in our inventory to make this look good. So right now make sure that you have clicked on your canvas and selected scale with screen size for now. Then you can open your inventory script, and when you have opened that, you need to go to your create layout function, and in your create layout function you need to add the scale factor of the canvas down here, and you can do that by saying slot size multiplied by canvas dot scale factor. And you just have to do the same down here. Multiply by canvas dot scale factor. Save that and go back into your project here. Click on your inventory and make sure that it's a little bigger. Maybe I want 10. Run it again. Then you'll see that the slots actually fits inside the inventory now, regardless of the screen size, even without our canvas script, handle canvas script. So now you can actually just keep your scale with screen size on at all times. So this was just a little fix. It's not necessary, but I just think it's a better way of doing it. Okay, so if you make your inventory a little smaller again, click on your inventory here in your hierarchy, and then set the slots to, for example, 5. So if I run my inventory again, and I pick up some health potions here, okay, now I can see they stack at 2, but if I fill up my inventory like this, and I take my potion here away and I try to delete it, well, then it disappears from my inventory, but I'm not able to pick any more items up because my inventory is actually still full, because I've forgotten to add an extra slot to my inventory when I've deleted an item from my inventory. So you can actually fix this with one line of code. If you jump back into your script and then go to your update function, you'll see we have this part of the code here under our get mouse button up 0. This part of the code actually deletes the item from our inventory, but I've forgotten to add an extra empty slot. So actually all we need to do is say empty slot ++, and now we have added an extra empty slot to our inventory. So if I save this, jump back into Unity and do the exact same thing, where I pick up all my health potions here, and I take this stack, delete it, well, then I should be able to pick it up again, as you can see here. I'll pick up something else. So that was also a little bug that has been fixed. Okay, so the last bug I want to fix before we start adding the new features is an invalid operation exception. And basically an invalid operation exception occurs here because we're trying to move an item that doesn't exist. I'm just going to make my inventory a little bigger by clicking on my inventory and selecting slots here, so it looks a little better. Anyway, the invalid operation exception happens whenever I do like this. I pick up an item and I can easily move them around and everything, but if I pick up a stack of items and I right click on them to use them when I have picked it up, well, then I get an invalid operation exception when I try to put it down again, because I basically just tried to move an item that doesn't exist. So we need to make a fix for this, and it's fairly easy to create that fix. So to create that fix, we have to jump back into our scripts, and the script that we have to change some code in is the slot script. And we can basically fix this with one simple line of code. So our slot script checks up on if we click on any of our slots and if we want to use an item. And this onPointer clip event or function here basically checks that. So whenever we click on our pointer, we check if it was the right mouse button that clicked. And we want to make sure that this code here called use item, which actually uses an item in our slots, isn't triggered unless that we're not moving an item around. So after our right here, we're going to add something to our if statement. Going to say and game object that find hover. And this statement here basically says that, well, if hover exists and we want it to not exist, so we put this exclamation mark in front of it. So basically now this if statement says that if we press the right mouse button and our hover icon doesn't exist, well, then we're not moving anything and we are able to use our item. So if we save this and go back into our game and run it, then you'll see that you are unable to use your items whenever you move something around. See, now I can't use my health potion and I can't click on my mana potions I just picked up. That was the last fix, so now we can start adding some extra features to our inventory. So the first functionality I want to add is the functionality for opening and closing the inventory. and I've chosen to do this by fading the inventory in and out so it doesn't open instantly or closes instantly. You can also, with this functionality, you can also make it open and close instantly just by setting that time it takes to fade to 0, for example. But I've chosen to do it with fading because I think it looks a little better. So before we can fade out the inventory, we have to add something to our canvas, because whenever we fade out our inventory or fade it in on the screen, we need to fade everything out. That includes all the items in the inventory and all the buttons on it and everything. To do that, we need to be able to handle our canvas as a group, and we need to add a component by clicking Add Component, going to Layout, and then clicking on Canvas Group. And this adds a canvas group to our inventory. And as you can see here, there's an alpha, and this is the alpha we're gonna play around with when we open and close our inventory. If you can see here, if we take our alpha here and turn it down, you'll see that our inventory disappears in our game. Okay, so now we have the canvas group. Now we need to add the code to manipulate with this canvas group. So you have to jump back into your script. So before we start writing the specific code for fading in and out, we have to add some fields up here in the top of our script. So go to the top of the script and go to the fields region. Down here we need a reference to our canvas group so that we can actually manipulate with it. So public canvas group, and we need a private bool that sets fading in, so that we know whenever we are fading in to our screen with our inventory, and a private bool that is fading out. On that, we want to decide how long it should take for the inventory to fade. For example, we want to be able to say that it should take 2 seconds for the inventory to appear, or 1 second. So make a public float and call it fade time. When you have added these fields, we can start creating the coroutines that are actually going to fade our inventory in and out. And the reason that we're using coroutines is because we want the fading to happen over time, and coroutines are a very nice way to do that. It makes it very easy to do some functionality over time. So in the bottom of your script, you need to add a new enumerator so that you can use that in a coroutine. So we're going to make this one private because we don't want to use it from outside the inventory script. So just write private enumerator. And the reason we use enumerator is because all coroutines needs an enumerator returned. And we're going to call it fade out. So we're going to make 2 coroutines, one for fading out and one for fading in. And we're just going to start with the one fading to fade out. So if fading out, because we don't want to start fading out if we're already fading out. So if we're not fading out, well, then we're going to say fading out to true, so that we don't start this coroutine again when it's already running. And fading in, it's going to be false. And then we're going to stop coroutine fade in, because if our coroutine is already fading in, and let's say that we are closing the inventory right away when we start opening it, well, then we want to stop the fading in coroutine so that we don't try to fade the inventory in and out at the same time, and in that way we will never get faded in or out, because these 2 coroutines would work against each other and try to fade it in when it's fading it out. So this one line here basically makes sure that we're not fading in whenever we start fading out. And then we need a float, and we can call it start alpha, because we never know what alpha we will have whenever we start fading out. Maybe we started fading in and we closed the inventory before we were totally visible. So we're just going to save the alpha, the current alpha of the current alpha value of the inventory, so that we know what starting point we have to. We need the starting point to know where we need to go with the alpha from. For example, let's say our alpha is 0.5. Well, then we need to go from 0.5 to 0 to fade it out. So that equals canvas group dot alpha. And when you've done that, we need to go to save the progress, so float progress. So our starting progress is always 0.0. And this progress is gonna change over time. So when this progress is 1, well, then we know that we have reached our destination in our alpha, so our alpha is totally visible or invisible, according to if we want to fade out or in. Then we need to calculate the rate that we need to fade out with, and the rate is basically float rate is equal to 0.1 divided by the fade time, the time it should take for this inventory to fade out or in, for example, 1 second. Done that, we need to make a while loop that should run as long as the inventory is still visible. So our progress, as long as that's less than 0.1 or 1.0, that means that our progress at some point it reaches 1 and we're done fading. But as long as it's not on 1, well, then we still need to fade out because the inventory is still visible in some way. So canvas group dot alpha, because this line of code needs to change the alpha of the canvas group so that it fades out, equals math, and if you don't have this math f, well, then you can right click on it and press resolve, else I can see it uses Unity engine.math, so I guess it should be in there somewhere. Math.lerp, and it's going to load from start alpha, because that's the alpha we're starting with, and the end position of it, we want to go to 0 alpha, so that's 0, and the progress is going to be used as t, because the progress is the one we are looking at here all the time in our while loop. Then we need to say our progress plus equals our rate multiplied by time dot delta time to make it dependent on the time, so that it uses the time to increase our progress, and it uses the rate we just calculated up here, so that our rate is going to be in seconds, our progress is going to be measured in seconds. And then we're just going to say yield return null, because we don't want to wait for any seconds. We don't want this one to run every 5 seconds, for example. We want to run constantly, so we're just going to say yield return null. When we're done fading, when this part of the code is done, well, then we know we're done fading, so we're going to say canvas group dot alpha equals 0, just to make sure that if we overshoot it or a little, or we end at 0.09 or something, well, then we're just going to make sure that our alpha goes to 0, so we are totally faded out no matter what when this progress is done running. And then we're going to say fading out equals false, because now we're done fading. And this is basically the coroutine that we need to use whenever we need to close our inventory. We also need to create a coroutine that opens our inventory, which actually fades it in on the screen. So the easiest way to do this is just to copy our fade out coroutine. So take and copy paste this fade out coroutine and then just rename it to fade in. So basically fade in is going to be the reverse version of fade out. So we're going to check up if fading in instead of fading out here, and we're going to say that fading out is false and our fading in is true. Then we're going to stop the coroutine, the reverse coroutine, which is fade out right now. So whenever we start fading in, we make sure that we're not fading out if we start opening the inventory when we're already closing it. This is going to be left as it already is. The start alpha is just the alpha the canvas has. The rate is going to be the same. Progress is going to be exactly the same. And the progress here is going to be the same. The only thing we actually need to change here is this lerp function. So it's going to start alpha, and it's not going to go to 0, it's just going to go to 1. And that's basically what we need to change inside this while loop, because now it actually lerps from the start alpha to 1. So let's say our start alpha is 0, well, then it's going to change to 1 over time. Down here, when we're done lerping, well, then we're just going to say that our alpha is going to be 1 instead of 0. So we make sure that whenever we are done progressing, we put our alpha to 1, so we are sure that we can see our inventory totally. And here we have fading out. Well, that should be fading in instead, because now we're not fading in anymore, and we're going to make it false so we can start fading in or out later. So when we've done that, we can scroll up to our update function, because it's here that we need to add the functionality so that we can actually call these coroutines. So in update, we're gonna make an if statement that said if input dot get key down key code dot, and it depends on whatever code you want to use. If it's I you want to open for inventory, or B for bag, or whatever, I'm just gonna use B. So if I press the key down, that's called B, well, then I want to open my inventory or close my inventory if it's already open. So if my canvas group dot alpha, if that is larger than 0, well, then I know that my inventory is open, and I need to close it if I press the B button. So I'm gonna start coroutine, fade out, and it's very important that you start your coroutines by using a string, and that you not do like this by saying start coroutine and then fade out like this. You can start the coroutine just fine like this, but when we need to stop it again, then it doesn't work unless you have started it with a string. If you start it like this, then that stop coroutine fade out in the fading in coroutine is not going to work. So it's very important that you use the string here to start your coroutine. And basically we're gonna do an else set statement here, and that's just gonna be start coroutine, fade in. So if our alpha is larger than 0, well, then our inventory is showing basically, or it is on the way to showing. Well, then we're gonna fade it out. Else if it's less than 0, well, then it's not showing, and we need to fade it into the screen. So save this and jump back into Unity. So before we can test this, we actually need to do a few things. We need to click on our inventory, and we need to set these new parameters we just made, or these new fields we just made inside our inventory group. The first one is the canvas group, and the canvas group is what is going to make our inventory fade out, and we needed a reference for that inside our script so that we can change the alpha. So grab your canvas and drag it onto the canvas group, and it's just going to add the canvas group from the canvas, and this is the easiest way just to get access to it. Fade time is the time in seconds it will take for your inventory to fade in and out, and let's just keep it at 1 for now. You can always change this to 0 or larger numbers than 0. So if I run this now, let's just, before we run it, just click on your inventory and set the alpha or canvas here, set it to 0 from the get-go. Then you're sure that you can't see your inventory from the beginning. So if you play, then our inventory is invisible, and if I press my B button, it's gonna show up here, as you can see. And you can see that it takes that 1 second to fade in and out. If I would run my rerun my program with like 0, for example, as fade time, well, then if I press my B button, it's gonna show up instantly. So you have this instantly open and closing inventory. So you can basically play around with this and put it as you want it. I'm just gonna leave it 1 second. And as you can see, whenever we pick up some items here, well, they also disappear with the inventory, because it's the alpha of the whole inventory that we're using here. As you can see, there are some problems here. I can use my items by clicking on my inventory whenever it's invisible, and also another problem is that whenever we pick up an item here and I press the B button, well, then it just disappears and comes back here. So I still have my item carrying my item around. So we need to fix the two things. That first thing is that we don't want to be able to click our items when the inventory is invisible, and we want to put our items back when if I pick up this stack here and I close my inventory, well, then I want to put the items back in the inventory so that I'm not carrying them around on my mouse invisibly whenever my inventory is closed. So the first thing I want to fix is the ability to interact with the inventory whenever it's closed. And I can fix that fairly easy by going into my inventory script, and then I need to change something about my canvas group here. Because right now my canvas group is just a simple public canvas group here, but I want to be able to access this canvas group from other classes, let's say in our slot for example, because here I want to be able to check up of if my inventory is visible or invisible, and we can do that by checking up on the canvas alpha. So if the canvas alpha is 0, for example, well, then my inventory is invisible and I shouldn't be able to interact with it. But if it's larger than 0, well, then I should be able to interact with it. And I want to be able to say inventory dot and then canvas group to access it. And I can't do that unless my my inventory's variable is static. So basically what static means that is that it makes anything visible on the class level, which means I can write the name of the class, which is inventory, and a dot to access it, and it also makes sure that there's only one instance of that variable in your game, so there's not more more canvases. If you have more inventories, they are sharing the same canvas though. Let's see. So basically you need to change this to a static variable to be able to access it on the class level without having an instance of the inventory object. So I'm gonna say private, just to make this as object oriented as possible, private static canvas group, and then I'm gonna make a what's called property by either right clicking, refactor encapsulate field, or writing this code myself. I only want to be able to get the values from my canvas group. I don't want to be able to change it in any way, so I'm just going to leave the get here. And as you can see, I have my private static canvas group and my public static canvas group here, and this is the canvas group that we want to access. Before we can access it, we need to set the canvas group a reference to our canvas group on our inventory. Before we had public and we dragged it from our inspector or from our scene into our inspector. We can't do that anymore, so in our start function we need to say canvas group equals game object the transform, or I can actually access the transform the parent the get component canvas group. What this does is that it looks at our inventory here and then goes to my parent, which is my canvas, and it takes this canvas group and makes a reference to it so that I can use it from within my script. So now my canvas group up here has a reference to my my canvas group on my script, or my game object, sorry. So if I go back to slot here, and because I made this public and static, that property, I can say inventory dot canvas group to access it, and dot alpha, and if my alpha is larger than 0, well, then I want to be able to use my items. So as soon as my inventory starts becoming visible, I can click on my items to use them. So if you have written the code, then save your script and jump back into Unity. And in here we can test if this works. So if I pick up a couple of items and I close my inventory and right click, you can see that nothing happens when I right click in the air. But the second I open my inventory, it uses my items here. So I can use them right away when I start opening my inventory. There is an other thing we need to fix. This was the right click part of the inventory, but if I click on my first mouse button, I'm picking stuff up. And I'm still able to do that whenever the inventory is invisible. If I click on my first mouse button here, we'll see that I have picked up an item when it opens up again. And we don't want to be able to do that. We only want to be able to pick up our items when the inventory is 100% visible. So we need to go back into our script to create a little fix for this. Jump back into your inventory, and then we need to go to our move item function, wherever it is, there. And we have this move item function, and that's the one that actually makes it possible for us to pick up an item and move it to another slot. And inside that function we have this from if statement, and that basically encapsulates all the code that makes it possible for us to pick up an item. So what we need to do is to add the canvas alpha into this consideration here in this if statement. So inside the if statement you're going to write and canvas group.alpha equals 1, which means that we are only able to pick up our items whenever our inventory is 100% visible. So we can't do it whenever our inventory is fading in or out. And I've chosen to put it at 1 because then we skip some other bugs. Before we can test this, we need to fix one more bug. So if you scroll down to the bottom if statement here, the one where we check if to is null and from is null, well then we need to change this line of code from hover object equals null to destroy game object and find hover. So you can take this code up here and replace hover object equals null. Actually, you need to do the same if you scroll up and go to your update function here. There's also like hover object equals null, and you can basically just delete that. There's no reason to do that when we're destroying it up here. And when you've done that, you can save your script and jump back into Unity. Now we need to test if it works. So now I shouldn't be able to pick up any items when my inventory is invisible. See, I can pick one up now, place it, and if it's invisible, I can't pick it up if I spam it. And when it's visible again, I can pick up my items and put them back in the inventory. So you can basically spam it, and then you'll see when it becomes possible you can pick it up. So the next thing I want to fix is the bug where the inventory is closed and I'm still carrying around that item that I picked up from the inventory. As you see here, I'm picking up the mana potion, I'm closing the inventory, and I'm still carrying the mana potion around. So to fix that, we need to add a function to our inventory. And I'm gonna add it to my inventory script just above my two I enumerators here for fading in and fading out. And it's gonna be a private void put item back, because we need to put the item back when we are done, or when we close our inventory. And this function is private because we don't want to use it from outside the inventory script. So I'm gonna say if from is different from null, well then I want to destroy game object that find hover, because I'm closing the inventory and I want to destroy my hover icon because I don't want my items to be carried around anymore. And then I'm going to say from that get component image color equals color.white, because I need to change the item's color back to white because I'm not moving it around anymore. And then I'm going to say from equals null. So this is basically what I need to do right now. We are going to get back to this function later whenever we when we need to split our stacks and everything, but for now this is just fine. So we need to call this function somewhere, and we need to call it when we actually open or when we close our inventory. So basically we need to go to our update, and here we are actually closing our inventory when our alpha is larger than 0 and we press the B button. So here we need to say put item back, and that's basically it. If you save and go back into Unity and run your game, and you pick up some items, go into inventory, pick it up, and if you press the B button to close, then you'll see your item gets popped back into place. You can do it again here, pick these two up, close the inventory, and the item goes back in the right position. Yes. As you can see here, sometimes it's a little hard to pick the items up just because when the inventory is opening up, and that's because the alpha needs to be exactly 1 before you can start interacting with the inventory for picking up items. You can see here it looks like it's there, and you can change that alpha value inside your script if you want it to be different than 1. Maybe put it to 0.5 or something if you want to be able to interact with your inventory a little earlier than the final value of 1. So now we basically fixed those bugs that appeared when we wanted to open and close our inventory. The next thing we can do is to add the functionality to be able to split our inventory items into stacks. So before we can create the functionality for splitting our stacks, we need to create the visual or the interface for splitting the stacks. And the way I've done this is that I've been inspired by World of Warcraft, the way they split stacks there, where you shift click an item and then a box pops up where you can select how many items of that stack you want to pick up and place another item, another slot. So The first sprite, or I've created some sprites that we can use for this. I've created an arrow, and this is the arrow that you have to press whenever you need to increase or decrease the amount of items you want to pick up. Then I've created a background, and this is the background of the whole item split UI. And then I created a stack count background. This is the background of the number that indicates how many items you want to pick up. So if you want to pick up 3 items, for example, it's going to be written on top of this part of the sprite. And then I've created an OK button, and that's the button you're going to press to accept the amount of items you're picking up. So if you click 3, then you press OK, and then you picked up 3 items. All these new sprites need to be selected, and you need to select the texture type. So click texture type and then select sprite 2D and UI. And you can of course use your own sprites. You don't need to use this setup as I'm doing. I'm just going to show you the functionality and how you can do it. You can make your own sprites, or you can buy my project and download it, or if you already bought the first inventory project, you can just re-download that and get all these sprites in it. So I'm just going to click apply here. So the first thing we want to create of this new UI element that should decide how many items we want to pick up is the background, and we're just going to create it underneath the canvas here, but we don't want to put it underneath the inventory because it's going to be one item for itself. It's not going to be part of the inventory itself. Right now I want to change the canvas group into alpha 1 so that I can see what I'm doing whenever I add my new items here. So the first thing we want to add is the background, and we can do that by right clicking on our canvas, going to UI and then selecting an image. And this image is going to be the background, so click on the image and find the inventory split stack, and that's going to be the background of this little thing. Just set native size for now. Then you can select the brick tool here to the far right, hold shift down and then scale it down to a size you would like compared to your inventory. See, this is fine, I guess. So the next thing I want to add is the arrow. So we take right click on our canvas, click UI and click a button feed, because the arrow is going to be a button, so that we can increase or decrease the amount of items we want to pick up. And just delete the text, rename this one to left. Yeah, that hit very well there, left. And then right click on it, press duplicate and rename one of them to right. And the sprite you want to use there is just click on UI and then select the arrow, and do the same for the left one. Click on UI, image, select the arrow. So the source image should be changed to arrow, and then you just click set native size on both of them. And then you can take them both, move them on top of the background, and then just scale them down so they fit the size properly. Know how big you want it compared to your, yeah, that's about it. Just scale whatever in the way you want it, and then you take the left one and you pull it to the left side, and you just go to the rotation here, the Z rotation. It says 180, I guess. Oh, sorry, 180 of course. And yeah, then you just place them as you want them. Might a little close to the edge. Yeah, there we go. Other than that, we need to put them underneath the image. So the left button goes under image, right button goes under image, and the image can be renamed to stack size back. Then we also need the field where we can actually select our items, or we can see the number of items we picked up. So right click on your stack, UI, select an image, rename it to, what should we call it, split size, stack size, select the source image and find the stack count, set native size, scroll out and then hold shift down so you can scale it down, and then put it between the two arrows here. And you can always scale this up or down according to your needs, of course. And then the last thing we need is the button. So right click on your stack size, UI, press button, and go to the source image, find the OK button, set native size, and scale it down, and put it on top of your UI here, exactly where you want it. Yes. Yes, like that. I know this is not the prettiest UI. You can also move these things up a little if you want them to be more centered. But yeah, it works. It's just for functionality. It doesn't mean to be pretty. Click on the button, delete text, and rename it to OK. And one more thing, we have the stack size here. It actually also needs some text on it. So actually right click on it, press UI, click text, and then stack text, rename to that. And then you want to make sure that it doesn't go over the borders of this new element here. Just add it to the edge here. There we go. And when you have made sure that the text isn't bigger than the black field, you click on the text, delete new text, you put best fit on by checking this and saying it's going to be 15 and 15. Change the color to something that's visible, for example 1. And I want to make sure that it's centered in the middle. So if I write 1, for example, I'll be able to see that I have picked up, or I'm going to pick up 1 stack. Other than that, we need to set the anchors. If we click on our OK button, anchor needs to be set top left corner of the parent. Stack size will need to be the same, basically. Top left corner of the parent. If I could click this, go. Should also be able to select it like this. Click the stack size, click here. There should be one that's called top left here. Same goes to right. Click on the rect transform. Left, click on the rect transform. And then we have the stacked size back, of course also top left, because in this way everything is going to be scaled with the screen size whenever the screen size changes, because this what's it called, the position, the distance between these anchors and these are going to be the same no matter what. And if it's in the top left corner, for example, then the distance between the top left corner and the anchors is going to be the same no matter the resolution. On that, we need to click on the stack size back, and we need to take this pivot point and put it in its own top left corner, so that this is the 0 point of the this new UI element. Because whenever we want it to appear, we want it to appear exactly at our mouse, and it's easier if our 0 point is like exactly at the top left corner of the sprite. So now everything is set up, and we can start adding some code for this. We need to write a lot of code before we can actually split the stacks, but I'll take it step by step and show you how everything is done, so I hope it's not going to be too confusing. So first of all, I want to clean up in the code a little, because if we jump into our code and go to our inventory script, you'll see that we have this move item function, and this item function also shows this hover icon. So when we pick up a stack, well, it shows this icon hovering next to the mouse. And the thing is, we need to do the exact same thing when we split a stack. So this function I've highlighted here is basically something we need to reuse. So to reuse it, I'm going to cut it by Control X, and then I'm going to go below my move item function here and make a private void create hover icon. And then I'm going to paste all the code in here instead. And as you can see, it complains about the clicked item here. So we need to set that somewhere in our code so that we can actually reach it from our create hover icon. And we can do that by going to our fields up top here. And underneath our fade time, for example, we can make a private static game object called clicked. and we need to set this clicked inside our move item function. So if we go back to our move item, and in the top of move item we say inventory dot clicked equals clicked. So the reason that I go through the inventory class to access this is because I want to access the one we just made up in our fields, and then I take this clicked object, which is actually equal to the item slot or the inventory slot we just clicked, and then I store a reference to it in this. So now I have my clicked. Other than that, I need to make sure that I create my hover icon. So inside this if statement here, where I check if my slot I just clicked is empty, and if I need to pick something up, I say create hover icon. And everything should still work as before now. The only difference is that we just move all the functionality from our move item down into this function down here, so that we have split it up so we can reuse this. Okay, other than that, we also need to add some fields in the top here. So let's scroll up to the top and go below that clicked static game object you just made. You can always clean up in this later. For now, we're just adding the functionality. And up here, we need to add some different variables here so that we can actually start splitting our items. And the first variable we need to make is a public game object called select stack size, for example. And this is basically the UI element we just made, where we can click left or right or something to increase or decrease the amount of items we want to pick up. And the next thing we want to make is the public text, and this is the text where we need to write the number of items inside. So stack text, and then we're gonna make a private integer called split amount, and this is the amount of items we want to remove from the stack. And we're gonna make a private integer called max stack count, and this is to keep track of the max amount of stacks or max amount of items we can remove from the stack of items, so we don't go over and try to remove 4 items from a stack of 2 items, for example. And then I'm gonna my private static slot, and it's gonna be moving slot. Okay, so the reason that I'm adding this extra slot here is because that I want to store my things or my items somewhere when I'm moving it around. Before, we only had a from slot and a to slot, and we just took everything in the from slot and moved it to the to slot and swapped the to slot over to the from slot. But right now we need to have 3 slots, because I have my from slot where I pick up 3 items, and those 3 items I just pick up before I put them somewhere else in my inventory, well, those items needs to be stored somewhere. So basically this moving slot here is storing those items we are moving around until we are placing them somewhere else in our inventory. So that's the fields we needed to add just right now. On that, I want to change or add something called a singleton to my inventory. And a singleton is a design pattern, and it's kind of different in Unity than it would be normally in C#, because there's some things we can't do. But basically, I'm gonna try to structure it as close to a normal singleton as possible. The point of the singleton is to give all other classes access to the inventory class without having to have an instance of an object of the inventory, which means that I can go to my slot class and take the inventory and access the functionality, for example, access the canvas or something from the slot class. So to create that, we need to make an instance of the inventory, and that's going to be a private static inventory called instance. And this instance is the one that we have to access to access all the functionality inside the inventory. So we're gonna make a property for this by either right-clicking, refactor, and pressing encapsulate field, or writing this code by ourselves. So I don't need to set my instance at any point from the outside. I only need to get it, so I can return and get all these things inside my inventory. So I can just keep the get, and then I need to make an if statement in here that says if my instance equals null. So if I haven't accessed it before, or it doesn't exist, well, then I need to set it. So my instance should be equal to game object find object of type inventory. So now I'm just finding my inventory in my game world, and I just set my instance to reference to that inventory so that I can access the specific inventory from other classes, because this one is public and static, so I can write inventory.instance somewhere in my code to access this, and then I'm just going to return the instance. Before we're going to use the singleton, we actually need to add one more function, because whenever we click on a slot and want to split it, well, then we need the slot to tell the inventory how many stacks it has on it and what's the maximum amount of items we can remove from that specific slot. So to do that, we need to create a new function, and I'm just going to call it set stack info or something. So just create it in the bottom somewhere before your enumerators. So I'm just going to make public void set stack info, and it's going to take in the max stack count so that the slot can tell the inventory how many stacks the maximum can stack on this inventory according to the item on it. For example, if it's mana potions, it's one amount of stacks according to what you set it, and if it's health potions, then it's a totally other amount. So selected stack size. So selected stack size is that UI element we want to show. So when we shift click on something, we want to show that little box that makes it able to increase or decrease the amount of items we want to remove from this specific slot. So selected stat size, that's set active because we want to enable it, and that should just be true. So then it's active whenever we call this function when we shift click on something to split a stack. Split amount should be 0 from the get-go because we need to reset it, and this dot max stack count is equal to max stack count. So our slot is going to tell our inventory how many items we can maximum split, and this max stack count, this dot max stack count, is the field we just made in the top in our inventory. And stack text, I think you call it, there we go, dot text is equal to split amount to string. So the text inside our box is going to be equal to that amount we want to split it with. So whenever we increase or decrease our split amount, well, then the text is going to show how many items we're going to split from the stack. When you've created this function, then you need to call it for somewhere, and the way we need to call it is whenever we shift click on an item or a slot with an item in it, well, then we need to pop up this this little box that actually asks us to split the item or not. And it's now that we actually need to use that singleton we made before. So go to the slot class, and inside that class we have this onPointer click, and this one is called whenever our slots are clicked. And we can actually use this by saying else if. So if my event data that button equals pointer event data dot input button dot left and my input dot get key input dot get key key code dot left shift. So if I hold lift shift down and I press my lift button, well, then this box should pop up that asks me to split my items. Other than that, I also want to add some more. I want to say and this slot's items that count is larger than 0, because I don't want the I don't want the slot to be empty. If it's empty, then there's no point of trying to open up this box and splitting the items. Actually, I think I have something called is empty. Yeah. So if it isn't empty, with exclamation mark in front of it, and also if my game object dot find hover, because if I'm already moving an item around, well, then there's no point in opening up this little dialog that wants us to split a stack. So if I'm clicking my left mouse button at the same time as I'm holding down my left shift, and the slot has some items on it, and I'm not moving any items already, Well, then I need to do the following. I need to pop up this item GUI element on the mouse position. So vector2 called position, and then I'm gonna translate the mouse position to something I can see inside my canvas. So rect transform utility dot screen point in rectangle, and this is exactly the same thing we do with our hover icon. So it's exactly the same code basically. Then I'm gonna say inventory dot instance, and this part, exactly this part, is where we actually accesses our singleton we made before. So inventory.instance, and if I made a dot after this, you'll see that I can actually access everything on my inventory, all my prefabs, my everything that is public slots and everything. So inventory.instance.canvas transform as rect transform, and input.mouse button, because that's like the screen point where I want to put up this. So I want to take my canvas and I want to take the mouse position dot inventory dot instance dot canvas dot world camera. So I want to use the camera that I'm using on my canvas, and then I want to take the position out position, because I want to store all this information and translate it to a real position, and I want to store it in this vector2 here so that I can use it to put my UI element at the right position. And then I'm just gonna say inventory dot instance dot select stack size set active to true. So I actually activate my UI element from this part. Whenever I shift click something, I activate it from here. So now it's visible in our game when we shift clicked a slot where there is some items. And then I'm saying inventory.instance dot select stack size dot transform dot position equals to inventory.instance dot canvas, inventory.instance dot canvas dot transform the transform point, I think it's called. There we go. And then I want to give it the position. So this line of code basically just sets the position of my stack select UI element, this element we can click and change the stack size. And then I'm going to call that function we just made before. In our inventory we made this little function here that checks up on how many items do we have, how many items can we stack, and how many items is it possible for us to remove from this stack. And I'm going to call it here by saying inventory dot instance dot get stack info, or set stack info I call it, I think. Set stack info. And then I'm going to say items, because that's the amount of items we have on our slot, dot count. Yes. So here I'm basically telling my inventory that we have X amount of items on this slot, so that you are allowed to remove. So this code basically pops up the UI element and tells the inventory that it can remove that many items, so we can actually change it around. So before we can actually start splitting the items, we need to create a function on our slot that allows us to take a specific amount of items off that slot. So let's say we have 8 items in one slot. Well, then we need to be able to take 3 items out of that slot, for example. So to do that, we actually need to create a specific function. So we're going to make a public function that returns a stack of items. So stack item, because it needs to return that amount of items we want to move. We're just going to call it remove items, and we need to tell this function how many items we want to remove, so integer amount. So this is what we're returning, a stack of items, and this is the amount of items we want to remove. So first of all, we need to make a temporary list, temporary stack, sorry. So a stack, can't hit my keyboard, stack item temporary equals new stack item. There we go. Okay, so we need to remove the same amount of items from our inventory or from our slot as we want, as the amount we get in here. So we need to make a for loop that runs that amount of times, and then we're gonna say temp.push to add the items to the temporary stack, and we're gonna push items.pop. Okay, so this looks a little weird. We are calling push on our temporary stack to add the items, and the items we are putting in is the top item from the slot. So items.pop removes the top item from the slot and puts it into the temporary stack. So this we're doing like X amount of times. When we do this, we actually need to update the text on the slot. Let's say remove 3 items. Well, then if there's 4, we need to write 1 on that item or 0 instead. So stack text dot text equals items that count, because we don't want to have 4 written on a slot where there's only 1 item in it. And as long as it's larger than 1, because we don't want to write 1, we just want to write all numbers higher than 1. Well, if it's larger than 1, then we take items that count to string or colon string.empty. So this is a smart if statement, as I used earlier also in the other tutorial. We are going to set the text equal to items that count larger than 1, which means if items that count is larger than 1, then we're going to write the exact count on the slot. If this is less than 1, if this is not true, then we're just going to write string.empty, so we don't have anything written if there's only 1 item on the slot. And the last thing we need to do is to return temporary. So we return all the items we just removed from our slot, so we can put them somewhere else. Now that we are able to take a specific amount of items from our inventory slot, then we need to write the code that can take these items and put them in another slot and merge the other stacks. So if we jump back into our inventory, underneath our stack info, set stack info, well, then we can create a new function, and that function is going to be public void split stack. And this function is the function that will be called whenever we press that OK button on the UI element. So if I select 10 items I want to remove from a stack, for example, and press OK, well, then this function is basically going to take those 10 items from that stack. So first of all, we want to select stack size dot active set active true. And what this does is that whenever we sorry, not true, of course, false, because we want to hide it. So what this does is basically that when you click the OK button, it hides that UI element, so you can't see it anymore, because there's no point of having that up on the screen when you're not in the process of splitting a stack, because you just want to carry the items around. So the OK button hides the stack info, and if our split amount equals max stack count, because we need to check 2 things. We want to check if that amount we want to remove from the stack is equal to the total amount of items in the stack. So let's say we have a stack of 5 items and we want to pick up 5 of them by clicking 5 in that dialog box. Well, then we just need to handle this exactly the same way as we're doing already in the inventory when we click on a stack and click somewhere else, because we're picking up all the items. So we just want to say move item and then give clicked as a parameter, because we click on something. So we don't need to do anything specific if we're not splitting the stack, because if we pick up the same amount of items as the stack contains, well, then we don't need to split it, we just need to move it. Then I'm going to make an else if. So else if our split amount is larger than 0. So we only get to this else if statement if this is not true. So if our amount is less than the max stack, well, then we're going to check, well, is it larger than 0, because we can't split 0 items. So if it's 1 or above and below the max amount, well, then we need to split our stack, and we can do that by saying moving slot. And our moving slot is the place, as I mentioned earlier, where we carry all these items we just took off a stack in our inventory. So we have our from and our to. Our from is where we take the items from, the to is where we place them, and in between we have our moving slot, so we can carry them around somewhere without losing them on the way. So moving slot.items equals clicked that get component slot, remove items. This is the function we just made, remove items, and the amount of items we want to move is the split amount, because that's the amount of items we just entered in our GUI element. And then I'm gonna create hover icon, because I just split a stack and I want to have the icon so that it follows my mouse, so I can see where I want to place the so I can see I'm actually carrying around some items I want to place somewhere else. Now that we've created the functionality for taking a stack and splitting it, well, then we need to create this functionality for merging them again. Because if we picked up a couple of items from a stack, well, then we need to put them somewhere else in our inventory, either on an empty slot or on another stack of items of the same kind that they're stackable with. So before we just put them down, we need to consider something. We need to consider that all items has a maximum amount they can stack. For example, mana potions in my game here can only stack 5 times, so I wouldn't be able to take 4 mana potions and put on top of another stack of 4 mana potions, so I get 8. So we need to consider whenever we put a stack of items down, well, then we only need to take 1 item at a time to make sure that we don't exceed the limit of stacking. So to make sure we don't get over the stack limit, well, then we need to create a new function in here in our slot class. And that function should be called public item remove item. And the reason it's called remove item is because it takes 1 item at a time and removes it from a specific slot. And the point here is to use it only on that slot that we're using to carry around our items. So we just picked up 4 items in that moving slot we are moving around with, and we need to use this remove item from that moving slot, so we can take 1 item at the time and put it down in our inventory somewhere, so we're sure we don't exceed the limit. And this function needs a temporary item, and it needs to pop an item into our temporary item. So we're going to say temporary equals items.pop. So this line of code here takes 1 item, top item in the stack we are carrying, and removes it from that item, that stack we're carrying. And then we need to update the text, so we can just take this up here for our remove items, paste it here. So if we had 4 and we just try to place 1 item on a stack of, we have 2, let's say we have 2 stacks of 4 mana potions. The 4 stack mana potions is in the inventory, the other 4 stack is in our hand, and we try to place that 4 stack on top of the inventory, and we only need to remove 1. So we place them and we say temporary item equals items.pop, so remove 1 and put it into our inventory, and we need to update the text here so that we only have 3 in our hand now. When we have removed that 1 item, we need to we need to return the item we just removed so that we can put it place it in our inventory. So we need to return temporary. And that's all we need in this class for now. When we've done that, we can jump back into our inventory and write the function that actually merges the stacks. And basically this function is just going to be placed underneath the split stack, and we're going to call it merge stacks. So public void merge stacks, and it's going to take in 2 parameters. The first parameter is the source slot. So we're going to make a slot source, and this is usually the hand that we are using to carry around our items that we just split. And then the slot destination, and this is the slot we click on when we have picked up some items and want to place them somewhere in our inventory. So that's the destination. So next we need to calculate the max amount of items we can put on top of this slot we just clicked. So we have a mana potion stack in our inventory with 4 items on it, 4 mana potions. And if we click on it, we need to know that we are only allowed to place 1 more mana potion on top. So we're going to make an integer called max, called destination dot current item dot max size minus destination dot items dot count. So the maximum size minus the amount of items it has on it right now. That's the maximum size. So we're gonna make a new one called integer, and what should we call it? We can call it count, and it's gonna be equal to source dot items dot count less than max, and source dot items dot count and then max. Okay, so this function here basically calculates the amount of items we should move. So either it's going to be equal to the maximum amount of items that we can move, or it's going to be equal to the count on the source, which is all the items that we have. So if we have 3 items, well, then we can put 3 on top of it, or if we have max, well, then we can put the maximum amount. And this basically makes sure that we don't put too many items on top. So if we have room for 1, we only put 1. We don't put more than the maximum amount. So it basically clamps it in between that. So when we're going to make a for loop, and it's going to run as many times as we have the count here, and it's going to say destination.add item, and it's just going to take our source.remove item, that function we just made, and it's just going to remove that simple item from it. So basically what this function does is it takes one item at the time from our hand and puts it on top of that slot we just clicked on, according to how many spaces that are left on that slot. And if our source.items.count equals 0, well, then our hand is empty, so we have no more in our hand. We're just going to say source just clear slot to be sure, and then we're going to destroy our game object that find hover. And now we have actually created the function that are able to merge 2 stacks together. The last thing we need to do before we can test this is to make the functionality that makes us able to select the amount of items we want to merge, or sorry, not merge, but we want to remove from a stack. And that is basically that text we have out there in our GUI element. Well, when we press the arrow right, it should be increased, that text, so it starts on 1 or 0 and goes up to the maximum amount of items that stack can contain or can be removed from the stack. And when you press the left arrow, it should go down to 0, or it should go lower until it gets to 0. So we're going to make a public void called change stack text, and it's going to take in an integer called the amount of items we want to remove. So our split amount is equal to that item, that amount we just give in, and if our split amount is less than 0, well, then our split amount is going to be 0. So we never go below 0. We can't remove minus from a stack. Or if our split amount is larger than max stack count, well, then our split amount is going to be max stack count. So we never go above the maximum count of the stack. And then we need to write it in the text in our screen, in that black box out there. So we're going to take stack text. The text equals split amount to string. So that basically this functionality does is that it go on Unity, and we look at this, you'll see that if we click on this button, this text in here should go from 0 and upwards, and if I click the red button on the other side of the arrow, it goes from that amount downwards to 0. And this is basically what we made sure of is possible here. So now we've done that, you can save, and then we need to do one more thing before we can start setting up our scene. So scroll up to your move item function here, and in here we need to add some more functionality or change a little around. So now we need to handle the fact that we're actually splitting our items if we press the shift button. So up here we're going to make an if statement that says if moving slot that is empty. So if the moving slot is empty or isn't empty, well, then we are splitting a stack. So we know if moving slot isn't empty, well, then we just took some items and we need to handle things a little differently. So we need to take slot, a new slot here, slot temporary equals clicked, the item we just clicked, get component slot. So we just get the slot from the item we just clicked here. After that we need to say if the temporary slot is empty, so that one we want to put our items on, we just split a stack and we clicked somewhere in our inventory to place our items. If that is empty, well, then we can just place all our items in that slot. So temp slot that add items, and and then moving slot dot items. So we just place all our items there. Say moving slot dot clear to make sure that we can check up on this later if we are splitting a stack or not. And we say destroy game object dot find hover. Okay, so this code is run whenever we have split a stack and we click an item in our inventory. Well, then we need to check, is moving slot empty? This confirms that we are splitting a stack and we have something in our hand. Then we create a reference to the slot we just clicked, check if it's empty. If it's empty, we place all our items there. Then else if temp slot is empty. If it isn't empty, there is something there. Well, then we need to check if the slot we want to place something on, because if it isn't empty, there should be some kind of item on it. And we need to check if the item we want to place our item in our hand on is the same type of items as we have in our hand. So if moving slot dot items dot peak the type equals temp slot dot current item dot type. Actually, I should be able to say moving slot dot current item as well. Yeah, the type. Okay, so if the slot isn't empty and our moving slot item type is the same as the item type in the inventory just clicked on, well, then we can start merging the stacks. We also need to check, well, that slot we just clicked on, is it full or is it still available? So we need to say temporary dot is available. So if it is available, well, then we can start placing some of our items on top of this slot. And the thing we're going to do is just going to say merge stacks, and we're going to say moving slot and temp. Okay, so now we're merging the stacks with that function we just made before. Down here we need to change this to an else if statement, so we only run this if this isn't true. So we don't only try to place our items normally if we're not splitting a stack here. I would actually like to add one more parameter here. Instead of saying if from is null and canvas group is 1, well, then I also would like to say if input.get key, just to make sure, key code dot left shift. So if our, let's just say and, of course. So I'm also making sure that I'm not trying to pick up an item if I hold down my shift key. So nothing is going to interfere. So this is just like to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen when I click shift and try to split a stack. Okay, when you have done this, we should be able to set up our scene and test everything out. If you jump back into Unity, we can start setting up the scene so that we can test this split functionality. So click on your inventory first of all, and scroll down on the inventory script, and you'll see that you have two empty slots here, and the one is select stack size and the other is the stack text. So select stack size is basically the whole UI element, so you can just take this stack size back and drag it all the way into your select stack size. Under the select stack size back, there is a stack size, which is the black square here, and then we have our underneath that the stack text, and the stack text needs to be placed on the stack text spot here. So when you've done that, you're done with the inventory itself. Now we need to set up the different buttons. So the OK button needs to have an event here on the onClick, or needs to have a trigger a function on the onClick. So if you press the plus button, select an object by dragging the inventory down here, and then if you open the function here and go to the inventory script, you'll be able to select all the functions inside the inventory. And we created a specific function to split the stacks called split stack here, which should be called whenever we press the OK button. So we're just gonna select that. So whenever we click OK, split stack is gonna be called. So now we can split the stacks when we have selected a number. We also need to be able to select the number. So left and right also need some functionality on them. So if you click on left, for example, go to the plus, drag the inventory down, go to inventory, and then you need to select the function called change stack text, which takes an integer. So the left one should reduce the amount here inside, so you need to print -1. And the right one, you need to do exactly the same thing by opening, taking the inventory, dragging it here, going to inventory, going to change stack text, and adding +1. So now you can reduce and increase the amount inside inside the box here. Okay. So before we can test it, we also need to add another item to our scene, and that item is a slot that for carrying around all our split stacks. Because when we pick something up, we need to carry it somewhere, and we need that slot to be there. And we need to create that slot by taking one of the original slots and copying it. So if we go to our prefabs here, take a slot and break it out, and then I'm gonna rename this to moving slot, and it doesn't need any click functionality, so you can just click on it and remove the component that's called the button, and then we basically have our slot here. And I'm just gonna keep it in my scene. I can just create a prefab of it by dragging it back. Just gonna keep it in my scene so I can't see it, because it's just the only functionality it has is to contain items. It doesn't need to be visible or anything. We just need to use it later. So for now, just leave it outside our canvas so we can't see it inside your scene. Okay, so we only need to do a few more things before we're done. We need to add one thing to our scene, and we need to write some lines of code inside our inventory, but it's not a lot. We're getting there, I promise. So we need to change our hover icon so that it can contain a text, so that we can write something, because right now there's no text on our hover icon, and we may be interested in seeing that we are actually carrying around 5 items in our hand, for example. So this icon prefab here is the hover icon at the moment, but we want it to have a text, and basically all you need to do is to drag your slot into the scene here, and then just remove the button, and then just take the slot icon here, or not the slot icon, the slot game object here, and drag it into your icon prefab and replace it. So now your icon prefab has a stack functionality on it, or some text on it that it can stack, and then just delete the slot from your scene. So that's one thing we need to do. We also need to write some code in our script. So if we jump into our script, we need to go all the way up to our start function, because we need to use the static object we created called, where is it? Moving slot here, this moving slot. We need to instantiate, or we need to get a reference to the moving slot we just created in our scene before. And we do that by saying moving slot equals game object dot find moving slot get component slot. So now we created a reference to the exact slot outside in our scene, so that we can actually use it to move stuff around, put something there to contain it there, and then place it somewhere else. This is what we have done here. Okay, last thing we need to do is to go to the create hover icon. See if we can find it. Go to definition here. We need to go to the create hover icon function here, and we need to change one thing, and we need to add something. So right now we're using the from to translate the local scale and everything, and from doesn't always exist whenever we split a stack, because from isn't a part of that equation. So instead of from, we need to use clicked this. See if we can search for from. There's no more from in here, it's fine. And then we need to say hover object dot transform dot get child at index 0, because we just need to get the text. And if we look inside Unity, you'll see that our hover object here has a child called stack, and this is the one we want to access, so that we can set the text here whenever we are moving something around. So we're gonna say get child to get that one, and then we're gonna say get component text dot text equals moving slot dot items count larger than 1. This is exactly what we're doing every time. Moving slot dot items dot count to string or string dot empty, to make sure that we get the correct text there. There we go. But before we can test it, we need to fix two things inside move item, because I just realized that I made two mistakes when I was writing the code here. It's only 2 lines, so it's not a lot. This moving slot, that clear slot, is not intended. We don't want to clear the slot, we just want to clear the items on the slot. So it's just going to be moving slot dot items dot clear instead. So inside move item, inside the temp is empty, then this moving slot dot items dot clear instead of moving slot dot clear items. The other thing is that we also need to check up on if the input key shift is pressed down here on the 2, so we don't get an error whenever we split our stacks and everything. So to avoid an error here, we need to copy paste this part here where it says and input key code dot left shift and paste it down here. And we've done that, then you can save, and then you can jump back into Unity. So when you're back in the editor, you need to add one thing to our moving slot here. We need to add a button component, and the reason that we need a button component is because part of our code needs to have a button component on the slot it's handling, and sometimes it's also handling our moving slot. So to avoid any errors, you just need to click add component, go to UI and go to button, and then remove the interactable part because we don't need to interact with this one, and just set the transition to sprite swap. And that's it. You don't need to do anything. It's just our code needs this button component on it sometimes. Other than that, we need to go to our canvas and set the alpha to 0 so that our inventory is hidden whenever we start playing our game. We also need to set up the stack size back here. Maybe I should rename it to something else, but we'll do that later. The stack size back needs to be disabled because that little thing should only pop up whenever we shift click something in our inventory that has an item on it, and we don't want that to show up if we don't shift click anything, so it's hidden from the beginning by disabling it. So let's run our game and give it a try. Open the inventory up so you can see your items here, and then pick up a couple of different items. This is not 100% perfectly done yet. I'll show you a couple of things we need to add still, but the general idea of this is actually implemented pretty well. So first of all, you can move your stuff around as you usually could by clicking on an item and then just clicking somewhere else. But if you hold shift down now and click on a stack, you'll see that this little UI thing pops up now. And you can increase it by clicking the right arrow, and you can increase it to the maximum amount of the items in the stack at the moment. And you can decrease it to 0, which is always 0. If you click on this 2 one, you will see that you can only increase it to 2 because there's only 2 items in the stack. So when you open this and click OK for 0, nothing happens because you pick 0 items up. And if you go to the top here, it's the same as just moving the stack normally. You can see it picks up the whole stack here, and you can just switch it around. But if you click a number in between, let's say 4, you'll see that the stack is actually split. So now there's 1 left here, and you can't see where you've taken from. It's not grayed out or anything because you're just carrying around these, and you have 4 in your hand, and then you can just put them down anywhere else. If you click on 2 stacks, 4 is larger than 2, and you can merge them to 5. Well, then you can merge these 2, so you have 5 in this one, and there's only 1 left here. And as you can see, you can just split all these stacks here around, and if you pick them up, you can put them together again, just like this. So that's basically how the stacking is going to work. There are some bugs, or not bugs, but features we haven't implemented yet. If you look here, we can see we have 2 stacks of 4, for example. Let's make 3 stacks of 4. And if I have 4 items here, let's say I pick 3 up, then I have 3 items in my hand. Well, I can put them down on top of these, but if I put 1 item here, there's 5 left in this stack, but I still have, it's written on my hand here that I have 3 left, but I only have 2, so we need to update the text on the hover icon as well. And I can put this one down here, and now I only have 1 left in my hand, and I can put this one down here, and that was the last one. So the thing we need to do is to update the icon text whenever we put something down, whenever we split a stack, so that it actually reflects the amount of items we have in our hand at all times. Let's see, if we pick up 3 again, you'll see the same 3, and then we're done. Another thing Nothing we're going to fix, but just something you could be aware of. If you pick up a whole stack, just like this, you'll see that, yeah, okay, this one is just grayed out, and it's not written on your icon how many items you're carrying around because you're carrying the whole stack. But this is grayed out, so you're sure that it's the whole stack you're carrying, and you just put it somewhere else, merging it with somewhere else. I'm not going to write the number when we pick up a whole stack because it's indicated by graying out the icon. Other than that, there's something more we need to be able to do. We need to be able to pick up an amount of items and then delete them by clicking outside the inventory. That's not possible right now because we haven't implemented it yet. So what I want to be able to do is to pick up like 2 items, for example, and deleting them by clicking outside the inventory. One more thing we also need to do is if you pick up a whole stack and close the inventory, then it pops back into the inventory and it's back here. But if you pick up some of the items, let's say 3, and you close the inventory, well, then they're still in your hand when you open the inventory again, and that's going to be a problem. So we also need to implement that in our code. So we need to do those 3 fixes. Update the text and the icon when we put something down. We need to make sure we can delete some items from a stack, and we need to make sure that we put something back whenever we close our inventory. Okay, so to fix those 3 things, we need to go back into our script, and I have chosen to start from the top, so I'm just going to do the part where we are deleting a stack of items we're carrying around by clicking outside the inventory. And in the update function, we are already checking if we're clicking on the first mouse button, and here we're checking if we're clicking outside the inventory and if we are carrying a full stack around. That's like it's different from null. So I want to add some more functionality here so that we can also handle a split up stack. So some of you might be wondering why I'm always writing code that actually expands the current functionality instead of just rewriting the old functionality to get less code and make sure that the old code could like handle both split stacks and a full stack. The reason that I'm writing new code for this is because I don't want to go back to old code that actually works and then change it, because then I might break some other things and I might have to rewrite the whole inventory system. And I see the first part of the inventory system as a finished product. So instead of going back and breaking it, I'm just gonna write upon it to expand the code, and that's often a better solution if you don't want to rewrite your whole program. The thing is, if I would have thought about all these functionalities we're adding now from the beginning, well, then we might have rewritten the whole program a lot different in the first tutorial, but that's not the case, so now I'm just writing upon it. So that's why I'm going to make an else if statement here that checks if my event system again is pointer over object, and -1 is just the mouse pointer. And here I'm going to check if my moving slot is empty instead. If it isn't empty, well, then I'm sure I'm carrying something around and I need to delete it. So I need to say moving slot dot clear slot, and I need to say game object dot find hover, and I need to destroy it, of course. So outside this, I need to say destroy game object. So I'm clearing my moving slot and I'm destroying the game object. Let's save this, jump back into Unity, and we can do a quick test. It's always better to test those small things before we write too much code. So I'm going to take 2 of these, clicking outside the inventory, and there it is. I deleted them. And I can still move these around, and they work just fine. I can use 2 mana potions. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to go to the part where the wrong number was written on top of the icon. And I want to do that by going to, let's see, we have a create hover icon somewhere function. We have so much code now here. This line of code actually takes, when you split a stack, or when you split a stack, it takes this line of code. It takes the text or the amount of items we just picked up and puts them on top of the hover icon, so we can see how many items we're carrying around. So it's kind of this functionality we need. We just need to copy it, and then we need to go to the function that is called merge stacks, because merge stacks actually merges the two stacks, and it's here we need to update the text on the moving or on the hover icon. And this line of code removes one item from the stack, so down here underneath it we actually need to update the text upon the icon. And we can do that by simply just deleting all this and saying count string. So I'm taking the hover object and getting the child and getting the text written upon the hover object here. So that's the specific text, like the number written on the object. And I'm just saying, yeah, well, that text should be equal to the amount of items on the moving slot, which is the slot that contains all the items we're moving around. So this line of code should fix that little thing that makes gives us a bug whenever we actually place some items in our inventory after we have picked them up and doesn't reflect the correct number. So if we go back here, we can check it out. See, pick up a bunch of items here. Take a little while for us to pick up enough. Just go with 3 stacks of 5 or something. Here we go. Okay, so I have 3 stacks of 5. I'm just gonna split some of these up. So we have end up with 4. Just gonna take one more here. Yes. Okay, so if I pick up these items here and I try to place them, let's pick up 4 items like this. I place them here. Let's say first one, 5. I have 3 in my hand. I have 5. I have 3 and 2 in my hand, and I have 1 left in my hand, and that's the last one. So now the text is updated correctly. The last thing we want to do before we move on to another feature is the part where you have picked up a split stack and you close the inventory, and then you need to put those items back. And to do that, we need to go to the function called put items back. Here we have it, put items back. And this part already handles the full stack. Now we need to add the functionality that actually handles a split stack. So we're gonna make else if moving item and moving slot is empty. So if it isn't empty, then we need to handle it because we're carrying some stuff around. So we need to destroy our game object that find hover, and we need to say, well, we need to put the items back somehow. So we need to say for each item in the collection called moving slot dot items, because we need to put everything back from it. Well, then we need to say clicked, because that's the clicked is always the slot we just took all the items from. That get component slot dot add item item. Okay, so basically here I'm taking each item in our moving slots and putting it back one by one into the inventory. When we've done that, we say moving slot dot clear slot just to make sure that everything is fine. And out here we're gonna say selected stack size dot set active false, so that if we're closing the inventory when we're splitting a stack, well, then we also hide this selected stack size here, so that the numbers and everything disappears. Anyway, the next thing we want to do is test this. I'm going to show you there's one more thing we need to fix before this works correctly. So you can test it out here and see that it actually works okay. I can pick up some items, can take 2 of them off, and then I can close the item and it pops right back into place. But the problem is that if I pick up 5 items, for example, and I take 1 of them off, then I pick up some more items, then there's a stack of 5 here, and when I close the inventory, well, then that one I was carrying around pops back on top of that one that we took it off in the first place, and we have 6 items in one stack, which shouldn't be possible because our mana potions only stacks in 5, and now we have a stack of 6. So that's a little exploit you can use if you would put this in a game, and we need to fix that bug. So the easiest way to fix that bug is by saying that whenever we pick up some items here, let's say I take 1 off here, well, then I'm not allowed to put any more items in that stack until that I have put this one back. So I wouldn't be able to do this until I've closed the inventory and put my items back. So to fix this, we need to go back into our code, And then we need to go to our add item function inside the inventory, because it's here that we are actually in control of if we should put an item on top of another. So let's see if we can find it. Here's the add item function. I know this is a lot of fixes. Whenever we make something, we need to fix some more things, but I'm trying to fix as many things as possible so you have a complete inventory. But I'm not guaranteeing that there isn't any bugs when we're done with this that you might find, because I'm not playtesting this. I'm just figuring out what I think could be a bug whenever I create something, and then I'm thinking about it, then I figure out, yeah, okay, maybe this is going to be a problem later. I'm not playtesting this or anything, so if you find some bugs or something, then write it to me or post a comment on the video, then we'll figure out how to fix it. Yes. And it's always like that. You need to playtest stuff before you know if everything works, and I haven't tested in a game. But anyway, we need to add some code in this this code block here, because this is where we're actually placing an item on top of another in our inventory, and we want to check if we are actually allowed to place it on this this item, because we might not want to place it on top of that item we already picked some items off, so we can't get that annoying stacking bug. So inside this scope here, we are already checking if it's available to place another item, but before we actually place it, I want to check if that item I want to place something on is the item we just took some items off. So if moving slot, this includes that if it's empty, this checks if the moving slot is empty or not, and if it's not empty, well, then I'm carrying something around and I have to watch out for what item I'm placing it on. So if it's empty and clicked that get component slot is equal to temporary that get component slot. Okay. So the clicked item is the last item I clicked on in my inventory, which is actually the item that I just used to split a stack with. So is the stack I've split equal to the temporary, which is the stack I want to place something on? So if moving slot isn't empty, if I'm moving something around, well, this means that I split a stack. So that stack I just split, is that equal to the stack I want to put something on? If that's true, well, then I just want to continue, because I don't want to put something on top of that stack already. And then I need to make an else statement here and put this in. And when I've done that, then I shouldn't be able to place my items so they overstack by closing the inventory. Let's give it a go. So if I run back into my game, open up the inventory, pick up a few items here, say we take 2 of this, and you can see that it's not allowed to place anything on top of that one with 2. So if I close my inventory, it pumps back and there's 4 now, and next time I pick something up, it puts the 5th one on top here, and then it goes on. So now that bug is actually also fixed. Just to be clear here, I'm not sure if I explained it clearly enough. The reason that we're continuing here is because that if we find that item that we're splitting and we want to place something on it, then instead of placing something on it, we press continue, or we write continue keyword, so that we move on to the next item in our inventory by running the loop one more time. So continue jumps to the next loop in our the next iteration of our loop. Down here instead, if this isn't true, well, then we're just going to place our item on that that slot we are looking at the moment. So that's just a little explanation of what continue and this else statement does. Okay, so the 2 next things we need to do is, or the 2 last things we need to do is making the inventory movable and saving and loading the inventory. So the movable part is very easy. It's basically just the same functionality as we use whenever we are moving the hover icon around following the mouse. The only difference is that I want to make sure that my inventory only follows the mouse when I hold down or click on it with my middle mouse button. But for that, we're basically going to make a new function called private void move inventory. And I just realized that I haven't zoomed in at all in this tutorial. I hope you have been able to read whatever I was writing. I'm sorry about that, I didn't realize that, but you should be able to read it anyway. Vector 2, mouse position, and then we need to translate the mouse screen position into a position on the canvas so that we can actually use it to move around, move our inventory around. So rect transform utility screen point to, what's it called, rectangle, there it is, and canvas the transform as rect transform, and then we need the screen point to translate. That's the new vector free input dot mouse position dot x minus inventory rect dot size delta dot x divided by 2 multiplied by canvas dot scale factor, and then I need the dot input dot mouse position dot y plus inventory rect dot size delta dot y. I'm going to explain this in a second. Divided by 2 multiplied by canvas dot scale factor, and then I need the canvas world camera or something. Yeah, I'm not going to do it like that. Canvas dot world camera dot out dot mouse position. Okay. So what this actually does is that, I'm going to zoom out again so we can see. So basically this translates our on-screen coordinates to a real position where we want to place our inventory. And the thing is that I take my mouse position and I divide it by 2 and multiply the scale factor so that it is screen size independent, like resolution independent. The reason that I divide by 2 is because I want to place my inventory on top of my mouse. So whenever I click on the middle mouse button on my inventory, it's just going to jump so that the mouse is placed in the middle, in the center of the inventory, and then I can move it around wherever I want to place it. That's just the solution I've done. So basically this takes the position and calculates it according to the size of the inventory so that I can place it on top of my mouse, so the mouse is in the middle of the inventory. I hope this makes sense. Then I need to set the position, and I'm already in my inventory, so I need to say transform that position equals canvas the transform point, and then mouse position. So now it transforms the point to the correct position. So all this code does is to calculate the correct position and make sure that my inventory moves with my mouse position. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to make sure that this function is called, and I want to do that in my update. If I go to my update here, we'll see that we already have all our functionality for clicking on the different buttons here, but we also want to say if input.get mouse button to, that's like the middle mouse on my mouse. Then I want to say if event system is pointer over game object. So if I click the middle mouse, and I am on top of my inventory, so if I click the middle mouse on my inventory, well then I want to say move inventory. Just like that, yes. Okay, so this functionality should actually make it possible for us to move our inventory around. Let's give it a try. If I open it up and just pick up some items, put my mouse over it, press the middle mouse button, you'll see that I can actually move it around here on my screen and place it where I want it to be placed. You can see that it jumps to the middle, so if I have my mouse here, press the button, it would jump to the middle there, and then you can place it wherever you want to be placed. But you can make some buttons that unlocks or locks the inventory as you want it. Yeah, that's basically movement of the inventory. Then the last thing we want to do is to save the inventory. And when I say save, I want to save the position, the size of the inventory, all the items inside the inventory, and then I want to make it possible for us to load it as well. So that's the last thing we're going to do. And to do that, we need to create 2 buttons, and I'm going to create them in another canvas because this canvas is faded out at all times when the inventory is not open. So I'm just going to create a new UI. Then I'm going to go to canvas. Just going to call it button canvas, and I'm just going to add 2 buttons here by right clicking on it, going to UI and selecting button, and then I'm just going to duplicate it by right clicking on it and pressing duplicate. So one button is going to be save and the other button is going to be load. I'm just going to place them here in the bottom of my screen. The placement doesn't matter. It's just for testing stuff. Normally we would have some game that maybe loads automatically whenever the game starts and saves when you press a menu button or something, and now we're just testing stuff, so I'm just going to create 2 buttons that make us able to test the save and load function. We can change the text so it's written correctly by opening the button and expanding it, and then we can actually just click on the text and change it, and the other down here is going to be load. Okay, so that's the setup and the scene. Now we need to go into our script, and in here we need to create a save inventory function and a load inventory function. First I want to make the load function, or sorry, not the load function, the save function. So just place it anywhere in your inventory. Just gonna make it up here, public void save inventory. And that function, well, it needs to save all the content of the inventory and the placement and everything. And the easiest way to do this is by using player prefs. And player prefs is a way of storing values of variables in Unity without using any external way of saving it, like an XML document or something else, or serializing a class. So I've chosen to use this player pref because it's built into Unity and it works on all devices. So if you use this, you can also use it on a mobile device, for example. So first of all, I want to create the string I need to save, because my whole inventory, or all the content of the inventory, is going to be saved in a string. So I can load that string and see on slot 1 there is 2 mana potions, and on slot 2 is like 3 health potions, for example. I'm going to create a string which should contain the full information of the content of the inventory. So I'm just going to call it content, and it's going to be equal to string.empty when we start saving our inventory. So how are we going to do this? Well, we are going to run through every single slot in our inventory and save the content of that slot in this string so we can load it later. So to do that, we're going to run through all slots that count. And the reason that I'm not using a for each loop, I'm using a for loop, is because I need this index here to keep track of the slot that I'm looking at. I'm going to create a slot again, a temporary slot equals all slots I. So I take the current slot I'm looking at inside my for loop, and I store it in this temporary variable, and I'm going to get the component slot. When I've done that, well, then I need to check if the slot is empty. So if temporary is empty, because if it's empty, well, then there's no reason to save the information for it. I'm just not going to put anything in that slot. So if the slot isn't empty, well, then I need to store the information the slot contains inside my content string here. So my content string is going to be equal to plus equals, and then I to get the index in the inventory, like position inside the inventory, and plus, and then I'm going to separate this with a dash here, and then plus temporary dot current item to get the item dot type to string, plus, and then I'm going to separate one more dash, plus temporary dot item dot count to string, and then I'm going to finish it off by adding a semicolon. So basically my string is going to look something like this. For example, on the first slot it's going to be slot 0, and then there's going to be a line, and then there's going to be the type, for example mana, and then it's going to be one more line, and then there's going to be 3, and then it's going to be separated like this. So this string here this is what this content string could look like, this one. So this string looks like at slot 0 there is a type of mana potion, and there's 3 of them. And then I'm going to separate it again with a semicolon here, so that it's easy for me to split it. So I know when I reach a semicolon in my string, it's a new slot I have to handle. And then there's maybe on slot 2, there's going to be like slot 2 is maybe the next slot is maybe empty. So the next slot would be slot 2, and there's maybe a health potion, and there's 2 of them, for example, and that's it. So I can read my string through and see what's on each slot and what kind of item and how many of these items there is. So this is basically what this string does. So it's all going to be saved into this content here. Okay, so when I've done that, I can jump down here, and then I can start using my player prefs. So player prefs works like this. You write player prefs dot set, and then you can set what kind of value you want to save. For example, in our case, it's a string, set string, and then you need to give it a keyword that you need whenever you need to load it again. So I'm just going to call it content, and then you need to give it the value it needs to store, and it's going to be content, the variable content here. So whenever you're done setting in your player prefs, then you need to say player prefs dot save. Then you save it, and then somewhere else in my code I can actually just say player prefs dot load, get float or get string, and then the name is content. And then I could save it in a new string, for example, string loaded string equals this. And then this string actually becomes equal to this content here, because I set it with player prefs, I save it, and then I load it here by saying get string. But we're not interested in loading inside our save function here. It's just an example. Okay, so we need to save lots of other information. Save is just going to be in the bottom here, and then we're going to set all our player prefs first. So player prefs dot set integer, it's not float, integer, and the key is slots, because we need to save how many slots we have. That's just going to be the slots variable here, because if we have another inventory, of course we need to let's say that you're in your game and you saved your inventory with 2 slots in it, and then you suddenly have a slot, an inventory of 10 slots. Well, you load your game, you should go back to that inventory with 2 slots only. So player prefs dot set integer also need the amount of rows, and rows player prefs that sets float. We need the slot padding left and the slot padding left here. Player prefs set float, slot padding top, slot padding top. And it's very important that you write the string exactly the same way when you're loading it, else it can't find it. So if you make a spelling error in one of them, and if I would say player prefs that get float and then write slot padding wrong, then I wouldn't get the correct value out. Then we also need player prefs that set float, slot size, I'm going to call this one, and this is going to be slot size to get the correct size. And then we also need the position, because before we just added some functionality so we can move our inventory around. So basically we also need to say player prefs that set float, and we need to say x position equals inventory rect dot position dot x, and we need player prefs dot set float y position inventory rect dot position dot y. Okay, so now we have basically set up everything we need to save when we press our save button, and then we have made sure that we're saving it here. So that's the save function. When we've done that, we can actually start creating our load function instead. We can place our load function just underneath our save inventory. So write public void load inventory. And now we need to load all those player prefs we just saved up here in our save function. So first of all, we need to make a new string called content, and we need to set it equal to player prefs that get string content. So now we're loading this content we just created up here into this string so that we can reach it from our load inventory function. Other than that, we need to get the slots is equal to player prefs that load, that get, was it an integer slots. Basically we can just copy this one and slots and just replace these with these up here. So our rows is gonna get our rows, and then we can say slot padding lift should be equal like that, should be equal to player prefs that gets float, and slot padding lift this, copy paste it, copy it, paste underneath, and then take slot padding top and set it equal to slot padding top. Once we'll do it again, what we have slot size lift as well. So our slot size is equal to this slot size. Okay, so now we have loaded these 4 top ones. We're gonna wait with these 2 because we need them a little later. Yes, just gonna separate this to make it look better. Okay, so then we need to set the position of our inventory, and we can do that by saying inventory rect dot position equals new vector 3, and the x position is player prefs dot get float x position and player prefs get float y position. So now we have loaded the correct positions of the inventory, and the C position is just going to be inventory rect dot position dot C. It's just going to be exactly the same as before. It doesn't need to move that axis. So we have loaded in the correct formats here, like how many slots, how many rows, the padding between them, and the sizes of the slots, and then we have placed the inventory on the correct position. When we've done that, we need to recreate our inventory, so we need to say create layout again, because we just changed all these variables here, and create layout creates our inventory based on all these. So we just changed them and we need to do it again. Okay, that's the easy part. Now we just took and made our inventory the correct size and everything, but we also need to put stuff into the inventory. So this is the size. Down here we need to start putting stuff into it so that all our potions we had when we saved the inventory should be placed back into the inventory. To accomplish that, we need to split the string that contains all the information about the content inside the inventory, because we need to split it up into slots again, so we can take each of these informations and put it into the inventory with the correct amount of potions and such. And that means that we need a string array called split content. It should be equal to our content.split. I'll zoom in so you can see it a little better here. Content.split, and we're gonna make a single quotation, semicolon, single quotation, and then end it. So what this does is that it takes everything in between the semicolons and puts it into the split content. So just gonna make this one so we have an example. So we have a string called 0 mana free, and another string called 1 mana or health, for example, 2. So we have 3 mana potions on spot 0, and we have 2 health potion on spot 1, then semicolon. Then it's going to take each of these strings and put them into an index in this string array. So on index 0, mana is going to be, and index 1, the health potion is going to be this part. So this is what our inventory is going to look like if we do like this. Spot 0 has this, and the next spot has this. This is how this content is going to look like. So the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to use the split content to take every single thing inside here and use it to put something into in our inventory. So we're going to make a for loop. I'm just going to run it by x, and it's going to run split content dot length -1. And the reason I say -1 instead of just running the length is because everything ends on a semicolon, which means that this split content will always have an extra slot in it with nothing in it. Like here, this would also go into this. And because of that, well, then we're going to say -1 so we don't get an error when we try to use the empty string for something. Then we're going to make a new string array, and that string array is going to contain one of these values. So each of these values. So first of all, we split these into split content here. This is what split content contains. It's going to look like this. And when split content contains this, then we're going to split it again. So we're going to say split values, and that should be equal to split content position x, because we run through with this for loop here. So the first time we run through, x is going to be 0, and it's going to take the mana, for example. So position x, and then we're going to split again on the dash here this time. So this split content contains this down here will contain something like this. 0, for example, it will contain mana, and it will contain the actual number, for example this 3. So it will contain something like this. The first index in this split values will contain the slot it should be put in, which is slot 0. The next index inside split values will contain the kind of content the slot should have, and the third index inside split values will contain the amount of items that should be in the slot. Hope this makes sense. Okay, so when we have established that, well, then we can actually start using these values for something. So I'm going to make an index, and it's going to be equal to integer 32. If you don't have that, right click on it. Sorry, it's with large I. If you don't have that, right click on it, resolve, and then implement using system.parse, and we're gonna pass this split values and spot 0, because we want to get out the index that is placed on. So this basically puts this value, for example 0, into this index, because we need to position or place our content inside index 0 in our inventory. So in integer 32, the parse translates this string called 0 into a 0 like this, which is an integer that we can save here. This is all this integer 32 that parse does. Okay, the next thing we need is the item type. Type equals item type enum.parse, and this is a very long one. Type of item type, and it should be the split values 1. Here we go. And this should be, for example, that's the mana we get out of here. So what this does is we take an item type and we use enum.parse to parse a string into an enumeration. Then we tell it which kind of enumeration it is. It's an item type, which we made in the earlier tutorial. And then we take the string we need to pass into this type of item type, which is the string on position 1 inside our split values here, which contains the string called mana. So we translate this mana into an item type. So item type, we translate this mana, we translate that into item type dot mana. So this is basically what happens on this line. We take this and make it into this. Okay, so the next thing is the amount of items stacked on this slot. So int integer amount, and it should be equal to int 32 again. Dot parse, and what we're going to pass that split values to If I could hit my keyboard, there we go. So this is what we're splitting. That's, for example, 3 mana potions. So we are splitting. We are making this should actually be a string. So we are translating, again as we did up here, we're translating this we're translating into this, so we can save it in an integer, which is this, right? So this is what's happening here. I hope this makes sense. It might be a little confusing. So the next thing we need to do is to use these values to place an item inside our inventory. And to do that, we actually need to do 2 more things so that we can actually place an item in the inventory. We need to create 2 game objects, 2 public game objects actually, that we can use as prototypes for all these items we're going to put into the inventory. So the more different kinds of items you need to have in your game, the more different kind of prototypes you need. So in this case, we only have a mana and a health potion. But if you had more different items like weapons and stuff, you would also have to make prototypes of them so that you can actually use them to place them in the inventory whenever you load it. Because so far we have only put stuff in the inventory by colliding with one of the boxes there in our game and then putting something into our inventory. But we need that to happen without actually colliding with anything. So if we jump to the top of our script, just somewhere up here, then we can make a public game object called mana and another public game object called health. And these 2 are going to be our prototype. We're going to set them up in the scene in just a few minutes, but we're going to write the code first. So if we jump back to our load function down here, if I could find it, load, there we go. If we jump back in here and go to the place where we're writing the code before, well, then we need to make a new for loop. We need to say for, and we're just gonna go with I here, and it's gonna run as many times as the amount, because we need to use this amount to place our item inside the inventory. Because, for example, if we have three mana potions, well, then we need to do this part where we place the mana potion inside the inventory 3 times. So we're gonna make a switch case, and it's gonna be switch on the type. And the thing is, when we switch on the type, well, then if it's a mana potion we're gonna place, we're gonna do one thing, and if it's a health potion, well, then we're gonna do something else. So all slots dot and index, the index we just found, we know the index is the place in the inventory we need to place something. Well, that place, that get component slot, there we need to add an item, so we're gonna take the specific place inside the inventory and call add item, and we're gonna add mana that get component item, the specific item our mana potion is. So this line of code adds a mana potion to our inventory, and we need to do the exact same thing down here in our health. So here we just need to change this to health instead of mana. So now we have actually made the functionality for loading and saving the inventory. But before we can test this, we need to change a line of code at least inside the slot class, and we need to change something in the create layout function, because when we're loading something we need to handle something a little differently. Other than that, I also want to go to the load function, oh sorry, not load, save function and load function up here, because I figured that I actually made a mistake here. As you can see, here is it's called set float rows, and down here I'm actually getting in an integer, and to fix that I need to go up here and say set integer, because the rows is a type of integer. And other than that, there's also one spelling error here, y post instead of y position. So if this isn't correct, if I save this, well, then I would get a wrong a wrong value here, because here I'm trying to get float y position instead of y posts. Other than that, we want to be able to reset our inventory properly when we go to create layout. So if you go to the create layout function here inside the inventory, we'll see that we reinstantiate all our slots here when we start creating our layout, and that's happening every time we load our inventory. But we're never destroying or removing those slots that are already existing inside our inventory. So to fix that, we need to delete all slots from our game before we start instantiating this one. So we need to handle this by checking if it already exists, because when we just start our game and create our layout out, then we are not interested in trying to reinstantiate slots, or we are not interested in trying to delete all game objects inside slot because it might not already exist. So we're going to make an if statement that says all slots is different from null. So all slots should exist for us to do this. And what we need to do is make a for each loop. So for each game object, GO in all slots, for each of those objects, well, we're gonna say destroy game object. So when we do this, then we're sure that we destroy all our slots when we create new ones, so we don't get them stacking. So if we load 10 times, then we have 10 times as many slots in the end. One other fix we need to do is to go to our slot class here, and in here you'll see that in our add item, where is it? It's here. We're doing items.push item, and we can actually run into an error here because items hasn't always been instantiated when we call our load inventory, because of all these simultaneous actions. Then there's a chance that it tries to add something to our inventory or to our slot when we load it before we have actually instantiated items up here in start. So to avoid this problem, we're gonna make something called void awake, and awake is always called before start. So if we have something that is some other things that are dependent on something else, then it's a good idea to move it up here. So to avoid complications, just cut this line and put it into awake, and then there shouldn't be any problems with the null references when we try to load our inventory. Because when we load our inventory, we recreate everything, and then maybe start is not called before we try to add something to the item. So that's basically it for this. So let's jump back into the editor. So to make sure that we can save and load, we need to set up a couple of more things, and then we should be done with this part of the tutorial. Save and load button need to be assigned to the correct functions. So if you go to your inventory, or into your scene, sorry, and click on the save, and then go to the onClick function here, event function here, you can press the plus, and then you need to drag the inventory onto this place by expanding canvas and dragging it onto this onClick event here. Then you need to select and go to inventory, and this is the save button, so we need to select save inventory. You need to do the same for load. Click on load, click on plus, drag the item down here, go to function, inventory, and then you need to go and find load inventory. So now you can save and load the inventory. The other thing we need to do is to assign the two variables. If you click on your inventory here, you'll see that there's a mana and a health now, those two public objects we created. And we need to assign the two prototypes to these so that we can actually create them inside our inventory. So we don't want this prototype to be dependent on something inside our scene, because if that object disappears, well, then we won't be able to make more of those types of items. So what we need to do is to create prototypes of these two, because these two have this item script on it, and that item script actually describes everything about that specific object. It describes the type, and it describes the kind of icons it needs inside the inventory. So click on your prefab folder and drag the health down here and drag the mana down here. When you've done that, then you have your two prototypes, and these prototypes needs to go into the inventory. So just drag them onto the correct slots here by selecting the inventory and dragging them onto two empty slots. So when you've done that, we can actually test this to see if it works. So if we play our game and we pick some things up, just open the inventory so you can see what you're picking up. We're just going to pick a few things up, and then I'm going to spread them around the inventory so that we can actually see that this works. So now I have a few items. Just going to split them and put them some positions around the inventory here. And the last stack here, we're also going to split that and put here, and something here, and then we're also going to split one of these. Yes, okay. So now I've spread the items around my inventory, and what I'm going to do now is to save the inventory. Then I'm going to stop playing my game, and then I'm going to run it again, and then I'm going to open up my inventory and press the load button. And as you can see, everything is loaded into the inventory as it was before. The position is also saved, so if I would move my inventory down here in this corner, press the save button, stop my game, play it again, and would like to load it, well, then when I open it up, it's down here. I can also move it here, load it again, it's gonna go down to that position. I can use some of my items here, and I can load it again, then they're gonna come back. Yes, and that's actually the save functionality of the inventory. Thanks for watching my inventory tutorial follow-up. I know the video is very long, and it became way longer than I initially expected, but I guess it took a while to create those stacking functions, that save and load function. So I'm very sorry about the long length of this, but I hope you really got some information that you can actually use for something. If you have any suggestions, requests, bug reports, then please post them in the comment section or write me a private message or an email. As you can see, this video alone is based on suggestions and requests from you guys. So if you have anything, then just write me and I'm gonna make a video about it. If you really like my tutorial and you want me to keep making tutorials, then please support me by buying the project in the description below, because if you do that, then it makes it easier for me to keep all these things going and keep making tutorials. If you already supported me by buying the first inventory project, well, then you don't need to rebuy this, because you can just re-download your inventory project and this project will also be included in that file. If you don't have your download link anymore, then just send me a private message or an email and I'll resend the download link for you so that you can actually re-download this. Don't forget to include the email you used when you bought the first project, so that I know which email I need to resend the download link to. So thank you so much for watching.